This is the 1843 Moratock Iron Furnace in Danbury, North Carolina. I'm Darren, and this is the Industrial Revolution. This furnace was built originally, well, let's actually step back just a bit. Before this furnace was built, there was actually already an iron operation here. It's called a bloomery, which was a very old style way of producing iron. It produced fairly small amounts. They were looking for much larger amounts. So in 1843, they built this. This was built by Nathaniel Moody and John Pepper, and it was built primarily to support Moody's tunnel works. So in order to make the tunnels, they needed a good amount of iron, so they built this. People have been using iron for a long time, going back as far as 5,000 years ago. In that time, iron production has actually evolved quite a bit. Starting with fairly rudimentary bloomeries, which created just small amounts of iron that could be worked by blacksmiths. By the mid-1700s, much larger blast furnaces, like this 1843 Moratock Iron Furnace here in Danbury, North Carolina, began to be built. This type of furnace produced much more iron and a much more pure iron. It was also much hotter, so the iron was molten. This means that it could be cast directly or made into pig iron to be used later. Today, these towers are scattered all over the globe, pretty much anywhere there was local iron ore available, and most of them look pretty similar to this one, just a freestanding stone tower in the middle of nowhere. Originally, though, while they were in use, they were the center of much larger industrial complexes. The exterior features, of course, did vary, but they always contained at least a few things in common. Everything was centered around the main furnace, and we'll come back to that part in a minute. Directly in front of the main furnace opening was the casting house. Here they could cast pig iron, which is just the name for manageable chunks of pure iron for later use elsewhere, or they could even cast final products here. The casting house had a sand floor, which was used to make the molds. It had either open sides, or in some cases, a lot of windows to deal with the extreme heat of the operation. In modern casting houses, workers wear heavy protective clothing, but that didn't really exist back in the mid-19th century. To cast pig iron, for example, they'd press wooden forms into the sand for the individual pigs, and then connect them together with trenches in the sand. These trenches were called runners or feeders. From there, these smaller trenches would connect up to a main trench, sometimes called a sow, as in the mother of all the baby pigs, which would connect up to the furnace. After the iron is run into the molds, we'll get back to that part in a second, and has a chance to solidify, it's pulled out of the sand, the pigs are broken off the runners, and the runners themselves are also broken up into manageable pieces. It's then all sent off to the forges. The sand is then smoothed out again and is prepared for the next pour with the next set of molds. This process was repeated day and night, non-stop, for 6 to 9 months at a time, sometimes only stopping when the water supply for the water wheel froze up. So let's move on to the actual furnace itself. The outside of the furnace, called the stack, is built of rough, dry-laid granite. The structure is 28 feet, or about 8.5 meters, on each side at the base, and just as tall. It tapers a bit as it goes up, making it more stable. Not to be critical of this nearly 200-year-old structure, but check out all these little stone flakes shoved into the cracks to make the larger blocks fit. They're essentially acting as shims. It's obviously solid, and it didn't have to be pretty. The stack isn't solid laid stone, though. This is just a thick, heavy shell around the outside to provide structure. Even here, though, walking around the outside of the structure, you can see some of the internal structure poking out through the walls. See these iron eyelets? They tend to blend in, and I didn't notice them at first. There's 2 of these eyelets sticking out of each of the 4 walls, all at the same level. They're the outermost part of the internal skeletal framework of rods which holds everything together. As this furnace heated up, typically operating as hot as 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 1650 degrees Celsius, obviously things would tend to expand and shift. The iron framework helped to hold everything together. Many furnaces would attach large, flat metal plates onto the outside of the furnace over these eyelets, secured with pins driven through the holes. These plates would then help hold the furnace together as it expanded and contracted with temperature changes. The inner part of the furnace is built completely differently. Made of fire brick, the core, called the bosch, is shaped sort of like an elongated egg, open at the top and with a few openings at the bottom. The bosch is supported internally with iron frames around it. These include the ones we just saw poking out the outside, plus quite a few others built into the tower. As it's being built, the space between the bosch and the outer shell is filled with sand, both to provide structural support and also to help insulate the outer granite. This reduces the risk that the intense heat will cause the granite to crack apart and collapse. The top of the bosch is kept open, although it was roofed over, since you need to get to it constantly. That's why these furnaces were always built up against a hillside, to allow easy access to the bosch. I mentioned earlier that these furnaces typically ran for 6 to 9 months. Well, here's how it worked. From the top, shovel in a ton or two of locally made charcoal, followed by about a ton of iron ore, and finally a couple shovelfuls of limestone. Then repeat these layers until the bosch is completely filled up to the top. Now, light the bottom layer of charcoal through the hole at the bottom, called the tap hole, then close that hole up. Now start blowing in a huge amount of air, and don't stop. Oh right, did I forget to mention the air? That's why this is called a blast furnace. The Moratock Iron Furnace is located in a bend of the Dan River. Take a look across the modern road from the furnace. See that cutaway section? From near the top of the furnace, a long wooden sluice crossed through that gap and went upriver. These sluices, which worked by gravity, were common in mills, so nothing unusual here. The sluice powered a water wheel, which powered a pair of giant bellows. They were used to blow huge amounts of air, non-stop, into the openings near, but not at, the bottom of the furnace. The openings had to stay above the molten metal and slag inside. The bellows were connected through side openings, called tuyere openings, named for the pipes, or tuyères, which blew the air in. Looking into the north tuyere arch, you can see the fire brick bosch inside at the back. At the bottom, you can even see the top of the tuyere opening, where the pipe would have been inserted from the bellows. While we're here, we can also see some of the iron framework that holds everything together. There's 2 openings just like this. So while we look at the south opening, I'll remind you that these structures are not safe to enter. In my pack, I carry a 10-foot, 3-meter long telescoping pole, and I have a remote control camera. The tuyere hole at the bottom of this one is covered with debris, but you can still see the heavy iron framework holding everything together. Now, from the time you light the furnace until you eventually shut it down months later, you'll have 6 to 9 people working continuously around the clock taking care of it. They're feeding new stock into the top, making molds, tapping the iron. All told, furnaces like this tended to employ around 80 people, mostly working at the furnace and making the huge amounts of charcoal needed to keep it going. That doesn't include the iron miners. So after the furnace has been burning for a while, things will have burned down some in the bosch. Using the platform built from the top of the stack over to the nearby hillside, with ridiculously hot smoke coming through the top opening, workers would shovel in another batch. Always a ton or two of charcoal, a ton of iron ore, and a few more shovels full of limestone. They do this night and day for the full 6 to 9 month long firing, always keeping the bosch full. The charcoal heats the iron ore, breaking it down, burning off the impurities, and leaving the molten iron, which is much heavier, to flow to the bottom. It's not just iron, of course. You also get a lot of other impurities that don't burn off. Those mix with the limestone flux to separate them from the iron, and the resulting material, called slag, floats on top of the molten iron. This glassy slag was just discarded here at Moratock. While the furnace was running, workers in the casting house had created the sand molds. At the bottom of the furnace, inside the main front arch, it's time to tap the furnace. This tap hole was closed up with stone, clay, or both as soon as you lit the furnace. But now you drill or break this away, which is called tapping, and the 3,000 degree, 1650 degrees Celsius iron flows out, down the channels, and into the molds. The metal bars with handles that you see sticking up in this photo are attached to plates in the sand mold, which are effectively dams. These let you divert all the iron down one full channel of pigs before moving on to the next one. You never know exactly how much iron is ready, so you make more molds than you need and just keep filling until you're out of iron. Remember, there's probably more slag than iron flowing out of that furnace. Slag is lighter and it floats to the top of the iron. You might be able to tap some of it off first just by removing the top of the plug, but maybe not. Modern blast furnaces are really good at this and even have separate openings to tap off the slag, but even then, they still don't get it all. For any slag that does come through, you'll have people stationed along the trenches in between the furnace and the molds. Standing next to the flow, they'll use what are basically metal hose to pull the slag off the top. Once the iron and slag is drained from the furnace, you replace the plug. You pull the hardened iron out of the sand molds and break the pigs away from the runners. And then you just keep going. You keep adding charcoal, iron ore, and limestone to the top. You keep blowing air in. You keep working in the casting house. If you're not casting, you're either breaking up what you just cast or you're making the molds for the next pour. You keep going. Then, after 6 to 9 months, everything stops. You stop feeding the furnace, you tap the last of the iron and slag, and you let everything cool down. The next few months isn't a vacation, though. All that heat has damaged the furnace, and you need to do repairs. You've also burned through a lot of charcoal. This is what today is called natural chunk charcoal, and given the roads at the time, it didn't really travel well, so you had to make it locally, including cutting down the trees and making the charcoal, either in permanent kilns or in earthen mounds. The process is similar to what coke ovens do with coal. Check out my video on those if you're interested. Once the furnace is repaired, and you've got a huge stockpile of charcoal, and once the weather no longer threatens to freeze your water supply, of course, it starts all over again. So this furnace has had sort of a varied life. It was operated from 1843 into the 1850s, and then it was closed down. Reopened in 1862 to produce iron for the Confederacy during the American Civil War, and that was used to produce swords and munitions. Their supplies from the north were obviously cut off at that point. Towards the end of the war, though, the Union troops came down here and actually shut down this furnace, so it did not operate all the way through the war. Later on, it was intermittently fired up again until finally in the 1890s it was fired for the final time, and then it was shut down permanently. Despite the fact that it hasn't run in 136 years now, nonetheless, iron furnaces like the Moratock Iron Furnaces and furnaces like this all over the world, this is the Industrial Revolution. Hey, wait just a second before you go. I need your help to keep the channel growing here. First thing you can do is really easy. Just like, subscribe, share this video. Tell all your friends about it. That spreads the word. YouTube will see that and we'll show this to more people. Commenting more than just 2 or 3 words. YouTube says that's the most important thing you can get. It's the best kind of user interaction there is. So you can comment more than just 2 or 3 words. Also, if you're able to and are interested in helping out financially, these are pretty expensive videos to film, a lot of travel costs on top of the hours of work I do here. You can help out at patreon.com/industrialrevolution or become a member here on YouTube or a single contribution through Super Thanks. Also have an affiliate store. If you click that, anything you buy there, a percentage of that purchase will come to help fund the channel. Thanks for your help and look forward to seeing you next week.